Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette, number 115, I think. 115. I was thinking, what am I going to do if I'm at like 300 or something? I sure hope quarantine doesn't go on that long. Anyway, this is Philosophy Roulette, where we get a random paper off fill papers, or the internet more generally. Sometimes people send them to me. I'd appreciate it if you did, please do. And then we read and review it live. I've not read anything before, so let's take a look. What would I read this morning? It was something from, what was this? It was like American, nope, it was this one. American Philosophical Quarterly. Yeah, it was nice. Maybe I'll get back to disembodied animals at some other time, but let's get because I didn't read that one. I read this other one on aesthetic versus moral disagreement. So let's try to see what's new, if anything has popped up in the last few hours. AI in society, they post a lot, so I read stuff from them. Probabilist knowledge and action. See if any analysis is good to go. Ooh, and it's available. I guess I might have to do it then. Shucks. Thank you, Carlotta Pavese. Appreciate it. I think everyone should post. Everyone out there, if you're watching this, post your stuff to the fill papers. It will get, assuming you want your stuff to get read, that is. If you are joining me live and you want to link to the this fill paper page where you can download the paper, you can do so by typing !paper in the chat box. So, because when you show up, this old link isn't there. But you can just type !paper in the chat box, and the link will pop back up. So that's cool. So, here we go. 15 pages from analysis. Wow, that's huge. Save file. Open file. I almost hit the stop streaming there button. That would have been a mistake. Okie dokie, Probabilistic Knowledge and Action by Carlotta Pavese. I assume that's how you say it. I apologize to the author and everything else that I say wrong. So, let's find out about Probabilistic Knowledge and Action. According to a standard assumption in epistemology, I never have the standard assumptions in epistemology. If one only partially believes that P. So what's a partial belief that P? I only partially believe... I don't know what... Alright, we'll find out maybe. Then one cannot thereby have knowledge that P. Well, I don't know what a partial belief is at the moment, so let's find out. For example, if one only partially believes that it is raining outside, one cannot know that it is raining outside. And if one only partially believes that it is likely that it will rain outside, one cannot know that it is likely that it will rain outside. Many epistemologists will agree that epistemic agents are capable of partial beliefs in addition to full beliefs, and that partial beliefs can be epistemically assessed in addition to full beliefs, and that partial beliefs can be epistemically assessed at least as along some dimensions. However, it has been generally assumed that such doxastic attitudes cannot possibly amount to knowledge. I'm not entirely sure how. I have my own idiosyncratic way of doing epistemology and with respect to beliefs. So, I'm not entirely sure what even counts as probabilistic knowledge. Of course, there's a book by Moss called Probabilistic Knowledge, and so that's what we're going to talk about, which is not what I do. So, I'll shut up now. In probabilistic knowledge, Moss challenges the standard assumption and provides a formidable defense of the claim that probabilistic beliefs, a class of doxastic attitudes including credences, degrees of belief, and partial beliefs, can amount to knowledge too. Throughout the book, Moss goes into great length to show that probabilistic knowledge can be fruitfully applied to a variety of debates in epistemology and beyond. My goal in this essay is to explore a further application for probabilistic knowledge. I want to look at the role of probabilistic knowledge within a knowledge-centered psychology, a kind of psychology that assigns knowledge a central stage in explanations of intentional behavior, intentional with a T. My suggestion is that Moss's notion of probabilistic knowledge considerably helps further both a knowledge-centered psychology and a broadly intellectualist picture of action and know-how that naturally goes along with a knowledge-centered psychology. At the same time, though, it raises interesting issues about the notion of explanation afforded by the resulting psychology. My plan is as follows. In Section 2, I summarize certain crucial aspects of Moss's notion of probabilistic knowledge. In Section 3, I motivate a knowledge-centered psychology, and I show that this sort of psychology naturally goes with a broadly intellectualist picture of know-how. In Section 4, I apply Moss's notion of probabilistic knowledge to overcome some outstanding objections to a knowledge-centered psychology and to intellectualism. The final section, Section 5, raises two issues that distinctively arise for a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on this case and seeing how it matters in a psychological theory. Okie dokie. One might believe that it will rain. In this case, one has a full or outright belief that it will rain. But one might also believe that it might rain, or that it is likely to rain, or that it is likely that it will rain if the clouds are gathering, or that it is more likely that it will rain than it will not rain. Moss argues that these sorts of ascriptions can be used to ascribe probabilistic beliefs. Moss defends two distinct claims about probabilistic beliefs. The first claim is the probabilistic knowledge claim. That is, that probabilistic belief can amount to knowledge. The second is the probabilistic content claim. That is, the claim that probabilistic beliefs, and hence probabilistic knowledge, have a distinctive probabilistic content. The alternative to the probabilistic content claim is the view that probabilistic beliefs are to be understood as complex probabilistic attitudes towards simple non-probabilistic contents. On this view, believing, for example, that it is likely that it will rain is a matter of believing to a high degree that it will rain, and believing that it is more likely that it will rain than it will not rain is a matter of believing to a higher degree that it will rain than it will not rain. Moss provides a battery of arguments to show that this view of probabilistic beliefs ought to be replaced by a view on which the content of probabilistic beliefs, not their attitudes, is probabilistic. Accordingly, the content of the probabilistic beliefs that it will likely rain is not to be modeled as the proposition that it will rain, and not even as a proposition about the objective chances that it will rain, about its evidential probability or its subjective probability. Rather, it is to be modeled as a set of probabilistic spaces, where a probabilistic space is a mathematical entity made out of a domain of possibilities, an algebra of propositions, and an assignment of probabilities over that algebra. Okie doke, so we've moved the probabilities into the content area. I have no problem with that, really. That's cool. As Moss 85 notes, probabilistic knowledge claim, and is that like the page, or is that 1985? I don't think it can be 1985, but I thought, don't they use page numbers in analysis? I don't know. That's confusing to me. Granted, I get confused easily. Must be page 85. I don't think Moss is old enough to be writing in 1985, but then again, that's my basis off a picture I think I saw in Phil Papers once. So that could be an older picture. As Moss 85 on page 85 notes, the probabilistic knowledge claim could be very, very precocious. I'd be impressed. The probabilistic knowledge claim and the probabilistic content claim are independent. One might endorse the former while clinging to a complex probabilistic attitude view, and one might endorse Moss's probabilistic content claim while rejecting the probabilistic knowledge claim. Since my focus here will be on the latter claim, my discussion in the following will abstract from the probabilistic content claim. What does it mean to say that probabilistic beliefs can be knowledge? Considers 10% credence that it will rain. This is an example of probabilistic belief. But so I guess you know for certain that it's 10%. It's like you know that it's 10% because the content is 10%. So you are certain about the 10%. Okay, now for that credence to amount to knowledge, it ought to be true, for knowledge is factive. I hate facticity. This is like one of the banes of my existence. But that's okay in this context. It's not really a problem here. But yeah, this is like why I don't have the same intuitions as other people. What does it mean for such a credence to be true? This whole... this just makes me grumpy. Moreover, on many views of knowledge, for a doxastic attitude to amount to knowledge, it ought to be safe. For example, it could not easily be false. What does it mean for credence to be easily false? You see, I'm okay with this. Not easily to be false, but like the fact that you go from here to there, see, isn't the way most people are thinking about it. This then gets down to this. I'm okay with this. I don't like how it gets argued for nowadays. But anyway, see, as long as it doesn't affect this article in any way. In response to these issues, Moss argues that we can understand the factivity and the safety of probabilistic beliefs in deflationistic terms, starting from what she argues are their standard descriptions. For example, consider 1A through 1D. 1A, S believes that it is likely that it will rain. S believes that it is more likely that it will rain than it will not rain. S believes that it might rain. S believes that it will rain if the clouds are gathering. Okay. According to Moss, there is at least a reading of each of 1A through 1D that ascribe to S a probabilistic belief. On this reading, 1A ascribes to S a high credence that it will rain. 1B ascribes to S a higher credence that it will rain than it will not rain. 1C ascribes to S the probabilistic belief that it has its content of the set of probabilistic spaces whose domain of possibilities encompass some possibilities where it rains. And finally, 1D ascribes to S the conditional credence that it will rain given that the clouds are gathering. So far, so good. Yeah, I agree. So under what circumstances are these beliefs true? Here, Moss's answer is deflationistic. There is nothing more to its being true than it is likely that it will rain, than it's being likely that it will rain, than it's likely that it will rain. And there's nothing more to it being true that it was likely that it will rain than not rain, than it's being more likely to rain than not rain. Okay, so there's just a repetition theory here. It's just whatever it says goes. It's completely redundancy theory. Okay, that's fine, and that's standard fare, so that's cool too. The same goes for safety. One's safely believing that it is likely it will rain is just a matter of it not easily falsely believing that it is likely that it will rain, and that amounts to nothing more than one's not easily believing that it is likely that it will rain while it's not likely that it will rain. I know I can't even say that out loud. The important lesson of this discussion is that the proponent of probabilistic knowledge does not need to give up the safety or the factivity of knowledge, provided that one understands them in suitably deflationistic terms. Yeah, it seems reasonable that you can just do a redundancy theory along these lines. So, I mean, since it's all in the content, all this old stuff from knowledge can just be imported, so you've got a redundancy theory of knowledge and truth, so something is true just in case it's true, and so you're just importing that, just the content happens to be probabilistic here. So really, it's a redundancy theory of belief here too, which is fine. With this in the background, in Chapter 5, Moss argues that probabilistic beliefs are the sort of doxastic attitudes that can amount to knowledge by showing, among other things, that it makes sense for them to be justified or unjustified and that they can be Gettyered. I don't know if I've actually tried to do this. I've thought about it more than once to use the name Gettyer as a verb. But yeah. I mean, it's like being able to be Gettyered shows that they're knowledge at this point, which is sort of funny. Ending Chapter 9, Moss shows that probabilistic knowledge can be fruitfully employed in a defense of knowledge norm of action, according to which it is permissible to act only on what one knows, the sort defended by Hawthorne and Stanley, Weisberg, and Williamson, among others. Although I think that Moss has made a great case for this latter application of probabilistic knowledge, I think that probabilistic knowledge has a bigger role to play in vindicating a picture on which knowledge enters a central stage in the practical domain. As some scholars have argued, the relation between knowledge and action is arguably not merely normative, but explanatory. Knowledge enters a central stage in psychological explanations of behavior. In particular, enters into psychological explanation of intentional actions. The normative claim that knowledge is the norm of action, and the psychological claim that knowledge enters into psychological explanations of behavior are quite different claims. The former is compatible with there being intentional actions that are not knowledge-guided, and hence, in some sense, epistemically defective but still intentional. According to the psychological claim, by contrast, intentional action can only be there if knowledge is there, for intentional action is explained, at least in part, by knowledge. The next section motivates a particular kind of knowledge-centered psychology. Then, the following section shows that probabilistic knowledge helps fend off several objections to this sort of knowledge-centered psychology. Okay, towards a knowledge-centered psychology. A long tradition assigns belief a central role to play in folk psychological explanations of intentional behavior. But more or less explicitly, this tradition confines psychological explanation to an explanation of attempts. As an illustration of this, consider the usual example of a psychological explanation where one's beliefs that there is water in the fridge and one's desire to drink it together are supposed to explain one's attempt to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. Success happens when the world cooperates, when there is indeed water in the fridge. If one's belief is true, then one will succeed at finding a bottle. If one's belief is false, one will not succeed at finding water. The dominant thought behind a belief-centered psychology, at least as I understand it here, is the idea that as far as the psychological explanation of behavior goes, whether the world complies, for example, whether there is water in the fridge, is irrelevant. What we want to explain is the fact that one attempted to get water from the fridge, whether or not one has succeeded. And one's belief that there is water in the fridge, together with one's desire to drink it, suffices to explain one's attempt, whether or not one's belief is true. This assumption that psychological explanation should be confined to explaining attempts rather than successes relies on two questionable ideas. The first is the idea that actions are decomposable into attempts on one hand, into bodily movements, causal chains, or successes on the other. The second questionable idea is that attempts are the only mental components of actions. That is, that whatever needs to be added to attempts to get an intentional action is non-mental. If both of these ideas were true, it would be legitimate to confine psychological explanations to an explanation of attempts rather than successes. After all, if attempts were the only mental components of actions, they would properly fall under the domain of psychological explanations. On the other hand, if actions were not so decomposable into mental and non-mental components, and if actions could be intentional and hence mental beyond the attempt's contribution, then this residual mentality of actions too would call for a psychological explanation. Okie doke. Indeed, there are good reasons to think that actions are not decomposable into mental and non-mental components, and that even if attempts were in some sense components of actions, the mentality of actions would not be exhausted by the mentality of attempts. Here is an argument for this conclusion. If attempts exhausted the mentality of actions, attempts exhaust the mentality of actions, then providing that one attempted to perform an action phi, one's eventual success at phiing would have to be intentional. For on this picture, the intentionality and hence mentality of actions would be exhausted by their attempt. However, there are a variety of cases in which one attempting at phiing succeeds and yet their action fails to be intentional. That suggests the intentionality of actions cannot be reduced to intentionality of attempts. And intentionality being one mark of the mental, that suggests that mentality of actions cannot be reduced to the mentality of attempts. Alright, what are these variety of cases? Because I don't actually know, like off the top of my head. Are they going to tell me? Okay, good, they do. For considerations of space, I will here consider only two illustrative examples of the phenomenon, both from Gibbons. The first example is Bobby and the Bomb. Cute name. Bobby intends to kill his uncle by using a bomb in his house, and then after moving a safe by placing a bomb in his house, and after moving a safe distance away, pressing a large red button on the remote control device. He does not know much about how these things work. He thinks that pressing the button will cause the bomb to detonate, but has no idea about the details of the process. His belief is true, and we can suppose justified. But here's what happens. A satellite launched by the NSA and designed to prevent bombings of just this kind intercepts Bobby's transmission. This causes the satellite to send a warning to the intended victim, but because of an unfortunate choice of frequency, this causes the bomb to detonate. Bobby killed his uncle and caused the bomb to detonate and did intend both things, but he did not do either of these things intentionally. Well, he tried to. In this example, Bobby attempts to perform an action, killing his uncle, and succeeds by intuitively his actions is not intentional. I'm losing it here. Sorry, author. Hence, the intentionality and the hence mentality of this action is not reducible to the intentionality and mentality of the attempt. He attempted to kill his uncle by pushing the button. In pushing the button, he did, but the causal chain that he envisioned, if only dimly, was not the one that actually occurred. But since he didn't actually even understand it to begin with, why is this alternative causal chain so bad. He only intended to kill his uncle by pushing the button. He didn't understand the other stuff. And he doesn't have to understand the other stuff. So I'm not sure why you have to have the full range of the full causal chain, especially when it's already postulated that you don't know. Because he intended to kill his uncle by pushing the button. He did. It was just not by the causal chain that he would have even envisioned. But like, I'm missing how the intentionality must correspond to the full causal chain here. Okay. Yeah, okay. So the authors got to they, of course, thought of this objection. Now, Bobby and the Bomb involves a deviant causal chain, but there are other examples of intended and attempted actions that are not intentional, which do not involve deviant causal chains. Yeah, you see, I'd like a lot more background on this because I just don't. What he attempted to do, like, say you attempt to get the water, and say because from some dumb reason the fridge broke in two places and it shouldn't be working, and so the water, like, say not the water, say you're trying to get the milk, you want to get a glass of milk, and because of two separate broken things, the fridge is actually still working when it should have if any one of them broke. And either one of them broke on its own, it would have still, the fridge would have gone. But like, they both broke in ways that two things broke and like sort of caught each other, and the fridge continued to work through dumb luck. And so when you intend to get a nice glass of cold milk out of the fridge, you get yourself a nice glass of cold milk out of the fridge, and it's fine, and your intention is fine. But it couldn't have happened because you've got a deviant causal chain, because the coldness of the fridge is by some other thing than the working fridge. And so I can't see how this sort of ad hoc causal chain, which is being called deviant here, really is affecting your intentionality. Okay. Consider a second example, slightly revised from the one in Gibbons' 2001. Cindy and the lottery. In it, Cindy mistakenly believes that someone rigged a lottery in her favor and that she will be handed the winning ticket at the ticket store. Oh, it's like the McDonald's thing. On this basis, she believes of a particular ticket that is being handed to her, that if she buys it, she will win. She buys the ticket and wins. Woo, good for Cindy. So her belief that she will win the lottery by buying the ticket is true. It is even justified. But buying a winning ticket is a perfectly reliable way of winning a lottery. But intuitively, she did not intentionally win the lottery. So wait, she just gets one by dumb luck, but it wasn't rigged in any way. She only believes it's rigged. Mistakenly believes that someone rigged it. Okay. Here again, Cindy intends to win the lottery and attempts to do it by buying a ticket that she believes truly and justifiably to be a winning ticket. No deviant causal chain played a role here in making the ticket the winning ticket. Again, Cindy's victory is not intentional. Fair lotteries cannot be intentionally won. No, I intend to win every time I buy a lottery ticket. I mean, you really intend to play, but you also kind of intend to win too. I don't intend to lose. You do kind of believe it, but you can also intend to win. People believe that all the time, and then they get lucky and they're like, well, God favored me. It's like, well, okay. So it's like, I think I have a disagreement here with how much of the causal chain falls under your intentionality. That suggests once again that the intentionality of actions cannot be reduced to the intentionality of attempts. Well, I suggest it shouldn't be reduced to the causal chain either. But if so, we need a sort of psychology that differs from a belief-centered psychology, that it is not only tailored to explaining attempts. A kind of psychology where knowledge rather than belief enters central stage is promising in this respect. To begin with, note that both cases above can be accounted for by a knowledge-centered psychology. Fred does not know that he can provoke Fred does not know that he can provoke the explosion through his plan. Alright, so we are like almost clearly into justified true belief territory here. I mean, it was basically said right up here, justified true belief. Which, I mean, there's a bugaboo of me. I just like, why are we still doing this? Because we have nothing better. But that's like, it's like you're drinking like the bad poison because you have like, it's just terrible. And it's like you're expecting something good to come out of this crappy old theory that has been Gettiered. I mean, the fact that this shouldn't be used was used to show that something else counted as knowledge because it could be shown to be wrong. It's like a facepalm. Okay. Anyhow, so this is my problem with epistemology at the moment. All right, so Fred does not know that he can. Yeah, so that's what I was worried about here. This use of no is just sort of justified true belief no, and that causes me conniptions. That is why his success is too coincidental to count as intentional. Lottie does not know that she can win the lottery by purchasing that particular ticket. That is why her victory too is too coincidental to count as intentional. More generally, if one possesses knowledge, then one's belief cannot be lucky. Okay, well, see, I can go with this theory, but I'm just going to call this I mean, that's just a postulate to me, which is okay. So let's just go on. I'll just continue with that sort of position. Hence, a knowledge-centered psychology can explain why luck can undermine the intentionality of Bobby and Cindy's successes by undermining their knowledge. Okay? And it's independently plausible that an action based on knowledge is sufficiently under one's control to count as intentional. Hence, a knowledge-centered psychology can be motivated on the basis of intuition about cases. But there is also a more theoretical argument for a knowledge-centered psychology, one that hinges on the features that a psychological explanation ought to satisfy in order to count as a satisfactory explanation of its intended explanandum. Good explanations ought to be counterfactually robust. In other words, an explanation of an event that deserves a name ought to hold in a variety of sufficiently similar situations. For example, a satisfactory explanation of a car accident ought to show that the car accident would have also happened in a variety of sufficiently similar situations. Yeah, I mean, not ad hoc. It should be more stronger than that. Now, psychological explanations of actions can be modally robust only provided that the beliefs that they invoke are themselves counterfactually robust. For example, if my reaching for the bottle in the fridge has been caused by my belief that there is a bottle in the fridge, I reach for my glass of wine, and because I believe it's there. An explanation of my success invoking that belief will not be counterfactually robust, for it will fail in some sufficiently similar circumstances. Yeah, I mean, someone stole my wine. Hence, it will not be a satisfactory explanation of my success at satisfying my thirst. That means that for psychological explanations of actions to be good explanations, they ought to invoke modally robust beliefs. This provides some theoretical motivation for thinking that knowledge is the best candidate to feature in satisfactory explanations of actions. For even justified true beliefs, why? Give no guarantee of being sufficiently modally robust if they fall short of knowledge. These are some of the motivations for a knowledge-centered psychology. I mean, I guess the claim here is just Alright, we'll have to see. My final point in this section is that this sort of knowledge-centered psychology marries well with a broadly intellectualist view of know-how and action. First, note that the kind of knowledge that, on a knowledge-centered psychology, explains intentional action is exactly the same kind of knowledge that, on a broadly intellectualist picture, is required by know-how. To see this, consider the kind of knowledge that would be needed for explaining intentional action. Start with Goldman's 1970 action theory, according to which one intentionally phies when one has a plan to phi, where a plan to phi is a belief that specifies the meaning to phi. Intentionality belief. If S intentionally phies, then there are some means M1 through Mn to phi such that S truly believes that M1 to Mn are means for oneself to phi. Intentionality knowledge can be formulated along the same lines. Then why is this sentence here? Whatever. If S intentionally phies, then there are some means M1 to Mn to phi such that S knows as opposed to believes M1 to Mn are means for oneself to phi. This is incidentally the sort of knowledge that Bobby and Cindy lack in the previous examples. So yeah, this is, I guess, the causal chain here. Now, according to standard formulations of intellectualism, Stanley Williamson, all these people, one knows how to phi only if, for some means to psi and phi, one knows that psi is a means for one to phi. Intellectualism about know-how. S knows how to phi, and at least in part of a matter of knowing for some means psi to phi, S knows that psi is a means for one to phi. Hence, the knowledge that intentionality knowledge requires for intentional action is the same that intellectualists require for know-how. It seems like nearly impossible, because as above, for Bobby to kill his uncle, there's no way for any one person to actually know how basically everything, the causal chain at. This is actually the comment I got my freshman year of philosophy when I was in college. We don't actually have any idea how action at a nearness works. We know that spooky action at a distance, how things work far away, that's very strange. But action at a nearness is just as spooky. How does the causal chain from every little thing in Bobby's brain down to Bobby's thumb pushing the button, the physics of the thumb pushing the button, the interaction of the electronics in there, whatever that actually happens to be, going all the way to the bomb and how the bomb explodes. No one person could explain everything there. There's just more knowledge in that one little thing. It's like a monad. You'd have to explain the entire universe of physics to explain that. So I'm really worried about this sort of M1 MN here, and you need that because it just seems an impossible requirement. Okay, so in fact, the knowledge-centered psychology and intellectualism about know-how are strictly connected views supporting each other. Start from know-how intentionality, endorsed by many scholars, intellectualists, and anti-intellectualists alike, all these people. If S intentionally phies, S knows how to phi, and that's know-how intentionality. Furthermore, suppose that intentionality knowledge is true so that the intentionality of an action is to be explained at least in part in terms of propositional knowledge. Then by know-how intentionality and intentionality knowledge, we get that if one intentionally phies, one both knows how to phi, and one has propositional knowledge of some means to phi. Know-how intentionally knowledge. If S intentionally phies, S both knows how to phi, and for some means M1 to Mn, S knows that means M1 to Mn are means for oneself to phi. The intellectualist picture provides the best explanation for why know-how intentionality knowledge should hold. According to this explanation, know-how intentionality knowledge is true not just because of a coincidental aligning of propositional knowledge and know-how in intentional action. Rather, its truth is grounded on the very nature of know-how. But there is also an argument that goes in the other direction, that is, from intellectualism to a knowledge-centered psychology. Suppose that both intellectualism about know-how and know-how intentionality are true. Then intentionality of an action by an agent requires knowledge of the means to perform it. Hence, intentional action is guided by knowledge. That is, intentionality knowledge follows. A knowledge-centered psychology, it not only invites an intellectualist view of know-how, but action, but is also motivated by it. I mean, this is right. Like what they're saying here. I'm hung up on this this ellipsis right here, and I apologize for that. Yeah, but that aside, I don't think that I think the author is doing a reasonable job arguing for their point, but it's just I'm not in this tradition and causing me pause, I guess I should say. Okay, 4. Probabilistic knowledge, knowledge-centered psychology, and intellectualism about know-how. So far, I outlined a picture on which a knowledge-centered psychology should replace a belief-centered psychology, and on which a knowledge-centered psychology marries well with a broadly intellectualist picture of know-how. In this section, I want to show that Moss's probabilistic knowledge considerably helps with a defense of this general picture. In particular, several objections to intentional knowledge and intellectualism about know-how can be overcome if one accepts Moss's notion of probabilistic knowledge. The first sort of objection comes from the case of basic actions. Take action phi that is basic for subject S at time t. What knowledge, if any, must S have in order to intentionally phi at t? Suppose it was the knowledge that some further action, sighing, was required for phiing. Then phi would not be basic for S at t, for there would be another action, psi, that S must perform in order to perform phi. That means if any knowledge is involved in explaining S's performing a basic action phi intentionally, it must be knowledge that sighing is a means for one to phi, where sighing is not an action itself, but rather a matter of intending to perform one. Okay, with this in the background, consider the case of Mary, suggested by Satya. Mary's arm has been paralyzed for some time. Oh no. Although Mary has in fact healed, she does not fully believe that she has. Okay, so she hurt her arm, and she's better now, but she doesn't quite believe it. Hence, at the time of trying to clench her fist, she does not believe that she is able to clench her fist, nor does she believe that she can clench it by intending to do so. So the question is, what does it mean to be fully healed then if you don't know it? Do you have to know something to be fully healed? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'd like to read a different paper on that. Call this case clenching. According to Satya, this does not stop Mary from clenching her fist intentionally if she intends to do so. If one accepts the assumption that Mary's clenching is intentional on that occasion, it follows by know-how intentionality that Mary knows how to clench her fist, even though she does not believe that she is able to clench her fist by intending to do so. Oh, so this is like getting ourselves into actually Moore's paradox area. It's like Mary clenches her fist, but she cannot believe that she clenches her fist. Okay, so the example is at once a putative counterexample to intellectualism about know-how, and a putative counterexample to intentionality knowledge, for it supposedly shows that knowing how to perform a basic action does not require full belief, let alone knowledge, and intentionally performing a basic action does not require full belief, let alone knowledge. Probabilistic knowledge to the rescue! Exclamation point. If one appeals to probabilistic knowledge, one can accept that Mary's performance is intentional and yet insist that her performance is guided by knowledge. After all, as Satya acknowledges, a more fine-grained psychology encompassing degrees of belief may provide a more accurate description of this case. Mary plausibly has some degree of belief that she will succeed at clenching her fist that makes the effort of trying worthwhile. Standard epistemology tells us that this credence cannot amount to knowledge. If so, Satya's objection stands. But if Moss's probabilistic knowledge claim is correct, then this credence, though less than a full belief, can amount to probabilistic knowledge. Then Mary's case can no longer be used as a case of intentional action or of know-how without knowledge. This is a nice result you got right here. I like this argument. It's like I disagree with the whole thing, but this was a very good defense. This is well done. So it's like it's like, so this is a clever example. Hence, probabilistic knowledge helps fend off the objection from basic actions. Consider a different sort of objection, allowing cases of subjects differing in their full beliefs, but not in their know-how, nor in the intentionality of their performances. Two basketball players, Emma and John, attempt a three-point shot. Suppose they have the same chances of success, the same track record of success, and the same evidence that they can succeed. But suppose Emma is just slightly less confident than John that she can do it. In fact, John has a full belief that he will succeed at sinking the basket by shooting as he usually does, where Emma fails to have such a full belief. First question. If they both succeed, is it not plausible that they would have done so intentionally despite their slight difference in confidence? However, if knowledge requires full belief, a knowledge-centered psychology incorrectly predicts that only John intentionally sunk the basket. Second question. Is it not intuitive that both John and Emma can know how to sink the basket on this occasion? However, if know-how requires full belief about what one can do, only John knew how to sink the basket on that occasion. Probabilistic knowledge to the rescue! Exclamation point. Although John has a full belief that Emma lacks, both have some degree of confidence that they will succeed, and since in both cases their confidence is based on the same evidence, in both cases their degree of confidence might amount to knowledge. As soon as we follow Moss in allowing doxastic attitudes other than outright beliefs to be candidates for knowledge, this second putative objection also vanishes. Thus far, I have considered objections to a knowledge-centered psychology that are also objections to a full belief requirement on intentional action. Let me consider an objection that distinctively targets a knowledge requirement. Consider Archie, who attempts to shoot a target. The archer attempts to target, very cute. An expert archer, such as he is, he does what he would do in any similar situation in which the wind is quiet. But suppose a gust of wind could easily divert his shot, although it does not. His shot can be intentional as it seems, and he might even know how to hit the target, even though his belief about how he can hit the target in that circumstance is unsafe. After all, the way he shot in the circumstance might easily not have been successful if the gust of wind had intervened. Probabilistic knowledge to the rescue! The proponent of probabilistic knowledge could object that Archie's belief is probabilistic. It is the probabilistic belief that shooting in a certain way is sufficiently likely given certain normal circumstances to lead to sufficiently hitting the target. We might think of this as probabilistic belief as a conditional credence, a credence that assigns sufficiently high probability to hitting the target by shooting in a certain way, conditionally on certain normal circumstances being in place. This conditional credence can be safe in this circumstance and even be knowledge, for in normal circumstances it would not easily be the case that shooting in the way that would not likely be successful. More generally, it is independently plausible that the content of one's knowledge, intentionality knowledge, and intellectualism about know-how ought to be spelled out in probabilistic terms. To see this, start with intentionality knowledge. It requires that one has knowledge of some means, that they are means for one to phi. Now we've got the big phi, capital Phi. What does it mean for some what does it mean for some means to be means for one to little phi? I hope that's not a typo, but alright, whatever. Note that for some way psi of phi-ing, one will phi by psi-ing. That is far too strong, for one might intentionally do phi even though one has some doubts whether one will succeed. For example, consider Davidson's example of a man who is intentionally making 10 carbon copies as he writes, but does not know that he will succeed in doing so. So you're like pushing down, but you don't know how many copies you're going to make. Or consider Bratman's case, where one intends to mail the bills on the way to work, but one knows that they are forgetful and so doesn't know that they will actually do it. If knowledge is involved in explaining the intentionality of the action, it cannot be the knowledge that one will succeed at it. Should the most relevant knowledge be that for some psi of phi-ing, one in most cases succeed at phi-ing by psi-ing. This is also too strong. One might intentionally phi even though one might fail in most circumstances, as the baseball player who fails at batting 19 times out of 20 may nevertheless intentionally have batted the one time they succeeded. That suggests that the relevant knowledge is that for some means psi of phi-ing, one could phi by psi-ing. But what does it mean that one could phi by psi-ing, if not that one is sufficiently likely to phi by psi-ing, where what counts as sufficiently likely may vary from task to task. This gives us intentionality probabilistic knowledge. If S successfully and intentionally phis at T, then at T, S knows for some psi of phi-ing that oneself is sufficiently likely to phi by psi-ing. Finally, consider intellectualism about know-how. In the original formulation, it is the view according to which knowing how to phi is at least in part a matter of knowing that certain means are means for one to phi. But what does that mean? We do not want to require for some means to be means for one to phi that one's psiing invariably results in one successfully phiing, nor that it results in one successfully phiing in most cases. That would be too demanding. After all, Babe Ruth does know how to hit a home run, and yet fails at successfully hitting a home run in many circumstances. Well, he's dead, so he ain't hitting nothing. But points taken. In order to psi to be a way for one to phi, all that is required is for one to be sufficiently likely to successfully phi by psiing, where one counts as sufficiently likely may vary with the task at hand, and the circumstances under which the task is being performed. This gets us to intellectualism about know-how. S knows how to phi only if for some means psi for S to phi. S knows that it is sufficiently likely for oneself to succeed at phiing by psiing. Alright. Hence, if one unpacks the clause means for one to phi, a plausible upshot is that both intellectualism about know-how and intentional knowledge should be stated by the use of probabilistic language. They both require knowledge that one is sufficiently likely to succeed at phiing through certain means. These ascriptions are the sort of ascriptions that, according to Moss, can be used to ascribe probabilistic knowledge. Appealing to probabilistic knowledge and understanding, intentionality knowledge, and intellectualism about know-how anticipates a final objection. As Satia observes, it seems that one could intentionally perform an action, or know how to perform it, without possessing the concept could. What? How do you not understand could? Alright, whatever. And it seems plausible that one can know how to phi, and that one can intentionally phi even if one is not able to assess the objective chance of one succeeding at phiing, or even if one is not able to assess the likelihood of that outcome as one evidence. For example, Fido can know how to bring the bone back and can do it intentionally without being able to make any of these sophisticated assessments. I don't think you can just use examples from like the animal kingdom to say what or what not is understood by those animal agents. I mean, it seems very reasonable that animals have some sort of understanding that if they do one thing, that there's a chance that something else will happen. That's why you get dogs begging for food, because they understand that you could give them a treat if they beg for it, or something along those lines. So I'm not exactly sure this is a good example. I mean, the point makes sense one way or the other, but but you could say that maybe a baby, before it has any real stuff, that it might have intentionality. I'm not sure how. Actually, I'm not really sure about this one, because I don't like this example, because it seems like that animals have intention. Oh, that's right. The what's it called? The cat video. I'll post it again. There was a argument about the intentionality of animals and how we understand that, and there's a nice cat video where there's a cat stalking a bird, and the question is, how do we actually know what the cat is up to? Is it just walking near the bird in that fashion, or is it actually stalking in the way that we understand? So in that cat video, which I will post because it's a great video, it becomes manifestly obvious after the fact of exactly what the cat was up to. We can't ask it ahead of time because it doesn't have language, but it seems really that this sort of example has problems with it. Well, at least in that case, I have serious doubts. So I'm not sure about this, what it is to possess the concept of could. It seems very, I wouldn't want to say that about stuff. It seems very strong. Okay. Probabilistic knowledge to the rescue. By appealing to probabilistic knowledge, the proponent of a knowledge-centered psychology can allow for not very sophisticated agents to be able to perform intentional actions as well as to possess the relevant know-how. For example, Fido might have a high degree of credence that they will bring the bones back in. That credence can count as knowledge, even if Fido cannot entertain a proposition about the likelihood of their success. Yeah, see, why is this whole thing turning on whether Fido can entertain a proposition? I mean, it seems like a weird way to argue about stuff. I mean, I don't see how the propositional content of Fido's brain really makes a difference here. But anyway, I mean, yeah, I don't have a problem with the point the author is making. I just don't like that argument. Okay, anywho. Probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology. In conclusion, the appeal to probabilistic knowledge helps fend off some outstanding objections to a knowledge-centered picture of intentional action. This suggests that a knowledge-centered psychology might best be understood as a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology. Let me conclude by briefly mentioning two potential issues that distinctively arise for a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology. In Section 3, we have seen that satisfactory psychological explanations on behalf of satisfactory psychological explanations of behavior qua explanations ought to be modally robust. That means that for probabilistic knowledge to figure in psychological explanations of intentional actions, what it means ought to be intelligible for the corresponding belief to be modally robust. This imposes additional pressure on the issue of the intelligibility of the safety of probabilistic beliefs. As we have seen, Moss, page 104, gives a deflationistic answer to this question. For one's probabilistic belief that it is sufficiently likely that it will rain to be safe is simply for one not to easily believe that it is sufficiently likely that it will rain while it is not. That is, for it to be the case that in nearby worlds where one has nearby worlds. Don't give me this nearby worlds. This is just repeating this thing again. Okay. Where one has that belief is sufficiently likely as rain. Now, my gripe is, of course, the sufficiently likely just means nearby in world talk. Okay, my word with this deflationist account is that, as Moss herself acknowledges, sentences and descriptions containing probabilistic expressions can sometimes be used to assert or ascribe probabilistic contents, while at other times they can be used to assert or ascribe contents about objective changes or about contextually determined bodies of evidence. If so, what guarantees that a safety clause for a belief ascription is understandable and intelligible not only when it receives a non-probabilistic readings, but also when it receives a probabilistic reading? Interesting. Relatedly, on a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology, the question of what is the intended explanandum becomes urgent. One motivation for a knowledge-centered psychology, as we have seen, is that the intentional successes and not simply attempts need explaining. Now consider a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology. Would such a psychology explain the successes itself, or only that the success is sufficiently likely? Probabilistic knowledge might explain probabilistic facts, or likely successes. It is unclear that it can explain the successes themselves. This issue needs more discussion than I can provide here, but the general thought is that replacing knowledge-centered psychology with a probabilistic knowledge-centered psychology might demand a retreat from an explanation of intentional success to an explanation of something less than intentional successes. Whether this retreat is really undesirable or whether it can be avoided are issues I have to leave for further discussion. Okay, this is a nice essay. I have my normal beefs with modern contemporary epistemology, which is not this author's fault or problem really in any way, shape, or form. It's my problems, but I have not read Moss's work on probabilistic knowledge. That said, it seems like a pretty smart approach to a lot of these things by pushing the probability into the content and not into the credence. It seems like it does. What this author has shown is that you solve a lot of the problems that you might get in some of these other theories by not having to worry about the psychology of probability, but just allowing that to be part of the content of the psychology. Yeah. So that's fine. And then you do have to worry, I guess, as the author says at the end, about exactly what the outcomes are. But I'm actually with them that that's not a terrible problem to have. That might not be such a bad problem at all. So this is a reasonable essay showing that this probabilistic epistemology could be reasonably moved into a psychological area. Okay, that's it. I mean, I just have a bunch of technical problems with some of the background epistemology. Like, don't talk to me about justified true belief, especially when you use Gettier as to be Gettiered to show that that sort of thing is bad. I mean, it's like, then you go on to say justified true belief down here as if like this is the mark of knowledge. No, it's the mark of bad knowledge. It's like bad philosophers, bad. Why do we keep doing this? Okay, but that's my complaints, not anything against this author, really. But yeah, so that's it. Otherwise, it was actually a pretty nice essay showing that epistemology and psychology can work together in this way. So, please let me know if you have any questions, concerns, or anything else. Please send me something new to read. It's always nice to get suggestions. And other than that, have a great day and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye. I'll be back tomorrow morning.